Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Bar. Today, I am joined by Akansha Agarwal, who is the Senior Director of Go-to-Market Strategy and Operations in the Americas for NetApp. She's also the Global Chair of the DEI group within NetApp and is an investor and advisor to a bunch of other companies. And so I'm really delighted to have Akansha here today, and thank you so much for joining. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I love a good conversation.
So I always like to jump into the origin story, kind of figure out where it all started. So if I met a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old Concha, would there have been a sign that I was going to be talking to a future, go-to-market executive? Were you interested in business and technology at that time in your life?
So no, absolutely not. And not a lot of people know this, but technology is my or actually I should say third career. I started my career as a rocket scientist. So if you met a 10-year-old Akansha, that's all you would have heard about wanting to be a rocket scientist. So yes, very inspired by technology, but in a very different vertical in industry. And then I became a trader on Wall Street, and then somehow accidentally landed into technology and ever since loved it. So I think the short answer is no. You would have probably heard another geeky kid who was absolutely into stars and planets and constellations and talking about going to space.
Well, I have to show you something then. I didn't expect to do prop comedy here, but my son,
uh
it's an astronaut's
I can
mask. I'm
see
not sure
it.
if you see
Yes,
that, but
that's what my little one was last year. So I am
nice.
absolutely familiar with the helmet.
So then take me through, because you actually become trained as an aerospace engineer, and then how do you end up as a trader? What happens there?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I always think about accidents kind of happen for a reason. And I wanted to be an astronaut, studied aerospace engineering. Um, and I mean, look, I'm fascinated with all aspects of space and,
Yeah.
follow the industry today. But for me, I think I loved the complex problem solving. I love kind of really thinking big picture and having kind of these big, ambitious, hairy dreams, right, as the kind of things you work on. But at that point in time, and the industry has changed rapidly at this point, at that point in time, there was not a lot of private companies going into that field and sector. So um, as much as I love everything to do with space, I also find myself very much an operator,
Mm.
and wanting to see the impact of what I was doing kind of more often and more frequent. And I felt the industry at that point was maybe not as fast paced as the innovation you see today. So here I am graduating from with my master's and thinking about where else do I take all of this kind of deep, complex mathematical analysis and everything that I've studied. And somebody said, "Hey, you may think about wanting to do a minor in the B school." And I went to University of Michigan, so it's like, yeah, why not? I love data, I love numbers, I love financial analysis. So I did a minor in my business administrative degree when I was studying aerospace, and somehow landed with an internship at UBS and kind of fell in love with just the fast-paced nature of the industry, and started my career with Lehman Brothers back in the day. And who knew, Lehman would go through what it went through.
Yeah.
So I have certainly a story to tell because I was part of the mortgage-backed security desk.
Oh
So
wow.
very much in the thick of it. And I was at Lehman in 2008 when it went bankrupt, which is why I say accidents do happen, but sometimes, they happen for a reason. Lehman got acquired by Barclays. I became part of Barclays as an employee. And Barclays said, "Hey, we have an opportunity for somebody to go to Asia Pacific and help with, understanding kind of our mortgage-backed security desk there with the Greater China business." And I raised my hand, and I had never worked in Asia, even though I was born, brought up in India. I'd never worked in Asia. I said, I'll take the opportunity to be in Singapore. I moved across the world. I worked in the industry for another year and a half, and then decided to do my formal MBA at INSEAD, which is the French business school. And, like many, I went with a very open mind when I went for my business school, and said, I don't know what I want to do, but I want to explore all aspects. And that's when I absolutely kind of fell in love with, all the courses around strategic thinking and
Mm.
planning and corporate strategy. And but I wanted to do it in a very fast paced dynamic industry. um, I honestly don't even remember, but somehow landed at Google to lead their go-to-market strategy and operations, as a job and a career outside of, out of business school. And ever since, haven't looked back. So I've been kind of in that space and industry since then. But certainly, what it was an accidental landing.
Yeah, that's absolutely a journey. If you don't mind, I would like to go back to 2000, because you mentioned it's a story to tell, and yeah, who could have known? I mean, I think we have evidence that nobody knew. What is that like for you personally to go through? Hey, this company that I just bet my life on. You're a high achiever coming out of university. Presumably, you had chosen the right path, and now you're saying, well, this company, well, look what happened. What does that do for you personally in your mindset of going forward?
Yeah, so look, I mean, two things I'll say, and I think this has been my philosophy for a long time, forever, right? For right or for wrong. I really do like to think of careers as journeys.
Mm.
And if you ask me what I want to do, where I want to be 10 years down the line, I don't know. I mean, I have ideas and visions and, different paths I could take, but I do like to think about experiences that I'm taking throughout the journey. So, as much as personally, I think it was a setback. The reason I was that person who raised their hand without knowing what I'm signing up for to go on the other side of the world was because I always like to think about, right, what is it going to teach me? What is the experience I'm going to get? How is it going to round me up? So, you've probably heard about the term jungle gym, or kind of, right? I've always thought about life and career and experiences as a jungle gym. There's no
Mm.
linear path to getting, right? Every path, every experience teaches you something. So I think that with that mindset in mind, yes, I think it helped calm some of the anxiety and the nervousness about, hey, this is my first truly paying corporate job, and what's going to happen, right? Where this would take me. So I think that's part one. Part two is, I mean, look, I think it changed me to be a little bit more risk averse. And I don't mean that I don't like taking risk, but I think it taught me a bit more about taking calculated risk, which has served me really well as I think about my roles, right, in technology and the experience that I've been in. I'm still the big picture thinker. I'm still the one who's thinking about 4 years down the line, right? How can we grow twice as fast as we're growing? How do we take risks? But I'm a lot more planned and calculated and do the diligence, getting there.
I love that. I can hear the astronaut within you taking the next step into the new frontier of Asia, and then on to Google. I actually missed you by just a year at Google. I joined shortly after you left. But so you get into this world of strategy and operations in big tech. And was there a moment when you're doing this and it catches and you're saying, okay, I'm good at this. This is for me.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a moment, but I do remember, right, when I first started my career, I was doing a lot of the what was asked of me without really understanding the why.
Mm.
So I think when I think about, and there was a project that I had done around doing this massive data modeling around segmentation and customers and mapping that to our, share a wallet and TAM data, and Google being as large as it is, right? You can imagine that's thousands and thousands of customers, and trying to understand, how would I break this data down into verticals and vertical segments and so on and so forth. I think there was a moment in time where I was in a conversation with the head of North America at running sales for Google, who really took that data and said, "Oh, this is interesting, right? And how do we take this and turn this into the way we change the way we sell, change the way we segment our business, change the way we organize ourselves, change the way we talk to our customers?" And I think in that moment, I realized that data was a very powerful
Mm.
tool. And it's not as much as what the data is, but the so what you would do from it. And I think it changed my mindset to never look at the data without really knowing the so what, or at least asking the question. So I think at that point in time, right, I saw my career moving away from kind of a business analyst, a data analyst, to a more strategic go-to-market leader and saying, right, what I do matters because it can change the way the company shows up externally with our customers and the way we go to market.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you're taking this kind of directional path, and then you're starting to understand how things are made, and you can inform, which creates sort of a new layer of responsibility. I was watching an interview that you gave where you talked about go-to-market operations teams as an objective, trusted partner, and I'm wondering if you could talk about your evolution of kind of this characterization and how you landed on it with some of the other areas of the business that you've had to work with across a number of high growth and high scale companies.
Yeah, so look, I think that's a great question, and it's a topic that's very near and dear to me, right? Because I always think about, right, when you're in a supporting role or a business partnership role, you can take one of two parts. The part one is reactive and do as you've been asked, and kind of, right, provide supporting data on somebody else's strategy. The path two is where you have a seat at the table and you're really connecting the dots between what are the big company priorities, what is the function that you and your team is driving that connects to and supports the big company priorities. So, right, there's a term that I use, right? Oftentimes, rev ops leaders or go to market leaders or go to market strategy leaders think about, right, what's the KPI that I'm going to measure my team on? And I started this notion, and I jokingly used to say, right, if I could measure me on the annual goals, even though I'm not out there selling, but a huge part of what my team is doing is one of two things. One, helping define the strategy that's going to help us accelerate our go to market as fast as possible, and thus converting into pipeline, winning, growth, so on and so forth. And then the second pillar of that is, how do I help you do this in the most effective and efficient manner? So when you put that lens, right, you're no longer in kind of behind the scenes. I'll kind of, right, take on a role that's more reactive, to now having a seat at the table and helping influence the way the company and the organization that you support make decisions. And the only way you can do that is when you're leading one with data, which is, right, very much core part of what my team and my roles have been always rooted around. And second, when you have an opinion that is independent, that you can use to challenge a point of view in the room. That doesn't mean you're right, they're wrong, or vice versa, but it is an independent opinion that is not as feely or subjective. And I think both are equally important aspects of decision making. So that's where I do talk a lot about, right? Like having that independent, trusted partnership relationship. The one other thing I will add to it, look, trust is not given, it's earned in these relationships. So I always think about kind of three V's. I love threes, by the way. You'll hear me in a lot of frameworks with threes. So I always say, right, you have to be visible. So you have to have a voice if you have an opinion. You have to be vocal. And if, make sure you are sharing what your opinion is. But you have to be, more importantly, valuable.
Mm.
I think that's the third V that's very important. And when you're not really valuable, it's hard to earn the trust. So whenever I have new people joining in my team, I tell them, right, look, your role is to become a very trusted business partner, but don't assume that that's going to happen on day one. Make sure that you're really thinking about what value you bring to the table before you seek and ask for that trust in return. So I hope that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And I'm curious about how you kind of evolved in this role while the businesses that you were serving were some of the most nuanced and kind of most inventive businesses of our time. You're at Facebook, you're at Amazon, Cheetah Digital, Compass, and now NetApp. You're pioneering things like usage-based pricing. There's so much in there, and you have to run the business on a day to day. But you also are looking at the strategy and being forward facing. How do you keep the lights on during the day while also looking forward to, hey, we're creating an entirely new style of business. So I'm curious how you're able to innovate from your seat.
Yeah, so look, I think there's not a standard answer, right, that applies to every company. But I always think about that in frameworks or mental model. And the two that I will share is, one, if you're truly a growth company, right, or you are looking to disrupt the industry you're in, or take market share, or continue holding market share, whichever way you want to think about it, you have to think about transforming while you perform. And it's not because of any other reason, but the one reason alone. The industry itself and the ecosystem around you is transforming. So if you don't transform while you perform, you no longer have the, first mover advantage or the position that you hold. So as a go-to-market leader or as a go-to-market strategy and ops leader supporting your business, you always have to think about what, again, right, the two pillars. What can I do and shift in my go-to-market strategy that helps me grow faster? Pillar one. Or what can I do so that I'm driving more efficiency and effectiveness faster, leveraging tools and technology and data and AI? I know it would be remiss if we didn't talk about AI, right, in any conversation. So I think that's kind of one framework, right? Transform while you perform. The second one is very much still first principles thinking. And whether this is the Amazonian in me, right? I absolutely believe in being very customer obsessed. I think oftentimes our customers are telling us more around what's working, what's not working, and where we need to pivot or where we need to meet them, right, better, differently, faster, whatever that adjective is. So being very customer obsessed and really understanding who your customer is. You will be surprised, Kevin, like oftentimes when you ask people, hey, who is the customer you're trying to solve this business problem to? And you ask 5 different people and you might get 5 different customers. And that really does happen. So I do tend to really emphasize on the fact that let's be really sure who's the problem statement for and what does success mean, right? If you and I are looking backwards, 2 years, 2 quarters, whatever the time frame is, what should have happened, which would tell us that we were successful. Making sure that that is very clear before you jump into solving a problem, I think touches on so many aspects of whether you think about prioritization or right balancing today and tomorrow, etc. So really being customer obsessed there. And second, I think you said something which is very appropriate in all of the industries that I've been at. The problems that I have had the privilege of solving haven't had a playbook. I can't use what Google did to do, solve a problem for Meta, or what Meta did to solve a problem for Amazon, because in many cases you have a new problem, you have a new industry you're transforming, you're disrupting and creating a brand new vertical. So that's when you do go back to first principles thinking and saying, right, who's my customer? How large is the problem? What is the opportunity cost of not solving this problem? Am I best positioned to solve this problem? And if yes, right, how do I solve this problem as fast as possible and as effectively as possible? I know it's probably sounds like a very cliche and big picture answer, but I really do think those questions is what helps get the alignment across various stakeholders and the company.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I want to talk about that alignment, not just at the company level, but at the team level. Like you've now been in leadership capacity for a significant period of time, but I want to go back to the beginning of that for you. When you first became a people leader, was there anything that surprised you about the job when you took it?
I think lots of things probably surprised me about the job, probably still surprise me. I think everybody understands the power of being aligned. I don't think you will meet a leader who would say, hey, I don't agree with the power of being aligned. And everybody will still agree that we are not as aligned as we would like to be. So I think that's what surprised me when I first started. That still continues to surprise me. The only, I think, difference is I find that as I've continued in leadership positions, it is not a responsibility I leave for others, but I own that responsibility equally in saying it's not good enough for me to say, hey, we have different organizations that may not be aligned, but I would rather take that responsibility and say, hey, my responsibility as a go-to-market leader is to make sure that we are aligned. And this is where, again, my team hears this a lot from me, right? Don't get too hung up on what your swim lanes are. Right? Swim lanes are very important when you are an IC, when you need clarity on what my focus area should be. But as you continue to become a leader in your position, it's not as much swim lanes, but rather the goals and the OKRs and the KPIs that you're aligned to. And often, right, if you're aligning the KPIs right the right way across the leadership group, you can start to foster that alignment.
I like that a lot. And I'm curious how your leadership style personally has evolved during your career. You've worked in a number of companies with some really high scale teams. So I'm curious. You mentioned all the things that you had to do to keep the business strategy innovative, to make sure you knew what type of new technology was out there. How about on the leadership level? How did you continue to evolve in your own career?
Yeah, so look, I mean, leadership is a journey that I don't think I have mastered or ever will, because it is a journey that, right, everybody is constantly learning and evolving, right? I'm a different leader today than I was 2 years ago, and will be, 2 years from now. I think there are a couple of things that, at least key in the way I think about leading my teams is one, good or for bad, I don't like micromanaging, and I'm not good at micromanaging. So, which means that I tend to hire leaders that, yes, know their space, and yes, have the skill sets and background. But what's even more important to me than having the background is the ownership and accountability, principles in them, where they are not afraid to take ownership, they're not afraid to take accountability. And so I think that's one thing that I absolutely look for, both when I'm hiring but also in my style, right? I tend to hold people with a high sense of accountability and ownership. Second, I would say, just high standards, I think is important. And so, whether that translates into, right, constantly striving to improve a process, or constantly not accepting the status quo and thinking about, right, that's kind of back to your question, Kevin, like, how do you balance? You may be performing really well to keep the lights on in a process today, but you know that there are opportunities for you to define efficiencies or
Mm.
effectiveness with that process. Keeping that mindset where I want everybody, including myself and my team, to be thinking about, yes, we're running this process, but yes, we're also thinking about how we make it better. And that is part of our DNA and part of our culture, I think, is the second one. So continuously striving for that high standard, right? And optimizing there is probably the second one. The third one is, right, this kind of goes back to accountability and ownership, but I will say it in a slightly different way. One of the best things you can do as a leader is hire somebody that's smarter and better than you. um, and I always say I want every single person in my team to want my job, like to be gunning for my job, because that is, then I've hired the right kind of leader that, right, is always asking those big questions, is always thinking about transforming while you're performing, because then at that point in time it's no longer my responsibility only. Then every one of those leaders is thinking about transforming while we're performing in a balanced fashion.
Beyond your corporate roles, you're actively investing and advising in a number of different companies, socially conscious companies, women-led companies. I'm curious what type of companies kind of get you excited to start participating and how you're helping them.
Yeah, so I think there are two spectrums of them, right? One, as you mentioned, there are topics in the world, whether it's, right, women founders or climate change or sustainability, which are just important to me, because I think about that's kind of what I'm leaving the world behind for my kids and my grandkids and so on and so forth. So I think there is the vertical focus where I tend to, right, get interested and intrigued. So I think that's part one. And then the part two is technology. I think I'm stealing from what Warren Buffett says, but I am an absolute fan in every angle, right? I don't like to invest into something that I don't understand. Um, so when something piques my interest, either I go deeper in understanding that, or just don't invest in that. So
Yeah.
because I understand technology, I live in that space, right? Generally, the technology companies that are very much trying to put technology at the front and center to transform an industry that's legacy, hasn't seen that kind of transformation, is what piques my interest. And I love working with founders and early stage companies, because similar to what we talked about earlier, right? Like a lot of the problems that they're trying to solve, yeah, it may have been solved, but different size and scales, right? How do you take all of those learnings and help them kind of solve that problem that they have? And sometimes, because if they're in a brand new industry and trying to disrupt, the problems are not really being solved yet. So it helps me flex my thinking, right, and challenge and say, like, how would I solve this if this was
Yeah.
my company, right? How would I help them grow? So I think it's a rewarding experience on both ends, hopefully.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have a bit of a selfish question then. For these early stage companies, they're presumably, presenting to you how they're thinking about going to market. I'm curious if you see any patterns of things that they maybe miss in earlier days that you help them to correct, or you just notice is something that they could be doing to build a better foundation earlier.
Yeah, so look, this is my answer. Doesn't mean it's the answer or it applies to everybody. Like, I tend to personally lean a little bit more towards product-led companies where the product is really, really strong. That doesn't mean, right, it's not going to shift at some point in time to a more sales-led motion, but generally, right, I am certainly a much more product-driven investor. So I look at whether the product is very strong. So that's part one. The second part, I know I mentioned the customer obsession. I
Hmm.
absolutely like being very clear on, do we know what is our customer profile? Who are we trying to solve for? And how do you know that this is a customer problem? Like, is it my gut as a founder? Is it your gut as a founder? Or is there really research and, right, you've done that makes you understand that this is a problem worth solving? And third, whether you kind of put my go to market strategy and ops lens to it, right? Like, can I sell this? And can I sell this at scale? Um, like, is it a problem for a few people, or right, is it a big enough problem where somebody and many companies are willing to pay for it because there's a return on investment that they see? So I think for me, like, those are the three lens I often think about. I will say, right, Kevin, there is a difference in the advising when you're like looking at a 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100 versus 100 to a million, because when you're in that one, 0 to say 100 or even 100 million, right, you can kind of bootstrap your way there, and that's completely okay, right? That's part of the strategies. Let's find the way to bootstrap so we learn and grow and kind of figure out
Yeah.
the scale. But bootstrapping outside, post that 100 million is very, very hard. That's where the product becomes very important, right? Can you scale this at a somewhat of a low cost of acquisition, so to speak?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I know we're coming up on time here, so I do want to wrap with kind of a final question. If you go back to 10-year-old or 15-year-old Akansha who's wanting to become an astronaut, I'm curious if there was any advice that you would give, given your career and what you've seen now. What would you go back to that person, or maybe you when you're just starting at your career, and what would you say?
I think this came to me a little late in my sort of own journey, but I'd say if I was giving an advice to a 10 or 15-year-old is, don't be afraid of failure. Don't take it too personally. So there's something I say, to my kids, right? If you did your very best and you influenced everything you can influence, right? That is a job well done.
Hmm.
You can't always control the outcome. I think the 10 or 15-year-old probably was still learning the difference between what you do control and what you don't. All right. So, and as a leader, right, tying this back now sort of to my career, as a leader, you are both responsible for doing and influencing. And oftentimes, right, more influencing than sometimes doing. So don't underestimate the power of influencing a decision, influencing a direction versus always feeling like you are the one kind of doing it.
That's beautiful advice to end on. I appreciate that. And Akansha, thank you so much for spending time with me and the listeners here today. We'll link your LinkedIn profile in the notes so people can follow you, and we'll get some snippets in this full episode up. But I love taking the journey through your career, and look forward to staying in touch and seeing what you do next.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the conversation. Like I said, it really great set of questions. Loved, loved providing my candid thoughts on it.